Welcome to the New Masculine Podcast. This is a place where masculine identifying people come together in community to disrupt outdated models of masculinity and together construct new models for our way forward as men. As a special note, while this conversation is between men, this podcast values all beings and seeks to create positive impacts for all. I'm your host, Travis Stock. I am a master life coach, an equus coach, which means I often partner with horses when supporting clients, and I'm a teacher. In my coaching work, I am passionate about the balance of masculine and feminine energies in each of us, regardless of gender. I seek to help others nurture a relationship with both types of energy, which often leads to a greater sense of wholeness. And yet what I found in my work with men is that many of us have been taught messages about what it means to be a man by first teaching us to avoid anything that is associated with the feminine. That avoidance leads to few experiences of intimacy, emotions outside of anger, vulnerability, or even a sense of belonging. Striving to comply with these models of masculinity has many of us feeling isolated, ashamed, unworthy, afraid, angry, and depressed. That's why I started this podcast, to bring men together who are ready for something new, something more whole. As much as I love my conversations around masculinity and facilitation of men's work, I don't see others like me as much as I would like. What I have started to realize is I wish I saw more queer men leading in these spaces. Lucky for me, I recently had the pleasure of meeting my next guest, who is leading a men's work community right in my local area. Mac Scotty McGregor is a transgender activist and an educator who provides gender and LGBTQIA diversity training for corporations, colleges, and groups around the world. He also founded and leads an organization in Seattle area called Positive Masculinity, which hosts private groups and workshops for heart-led masculine folks who want to create a transformative path for masculinity in our world. More of this, please. I recently had the pleasure of attending one of their monthly meetings and found the space Mac holds to be diverse, inclusive, and heart-centered. On a personal level, he identifies as a trans man, as queer, and as a teacher. As you might be able to tell, my connection with him brings with it another personal level of meaningfulness around our shared passions, and I have a feeling you'll all be inspired by him as well. So let's welcome him into the New Masculine and learn from his life journey with masculinity. Welcome, Mac.
Hey, Travis. Great to be with you.
I'm so pleased you've joined me. I'm so pleased we've been able to connect. As I was sort of talking in the intro, like this really does have a lot of personal meaning for me to be with a fellow queer person that leads work around men's work, and not just queer men's work, but we're sort of addressing all masculinity and working with men who identify in lots of different ways. And so I really appreciate the work you're doing, and I'm just so grateful to connect with you around this.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so interesting. My journey to get here is quite unusual. But, I began my journey studying gender because I was born into a body, but I knew I was masculine since I was 4. I started changing my name, playing with other kids, to a masculine name. And I was born in the Bible Belt in the South, where there wasn't a lot of room, a lot of flexibility in gender roles. It was more rigid. And so, I've done this like dive into studying these gender concepts that we have in our communities and society, and how to navigate that. And I've also seen such an interesting view of, I didn't transition till later in life medically, because that's a whole story in itself, because I was on the U.S. karate team. I wanted the opportunity to compete, and they would have not allowed me to compete. Had started transition. So I got this first, 40 years of my life, this experience that even though I knew who I was inside, the world treated me a different way. So I got that experience. And then when I started transition, you go through the, you don't look like this overnight. Mm-hmm. You don't pass like overnight. So you go through this stage where people aren't sure which category in the binary you're in. And so then you see how the world treats you in that, when they're sure where you land on that, and how uncomfortable that makes people, because, they're taught you should be in this box or that box. And if they're not sure where to put you, it makes people uncomfortable and feel unstable. Right. So I got to experience that, and I'm a big observer of human behavior. And so this has been quite the interesting journey. And then how I look now, I'm treated totally different.
Mm-hmm.
And just the journey of how the world treats you and those different spaces is just really interesting.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is something that really lights me up about why I want more queer men in these spaces, is that our life journeys have taught us, because of our own life, our own survival mechanisms, our own ways of staying safe in a world that does want us to be one thing or the other,
Yeah.
where we are uniquely positioned to explore the concepts of masculinity and to critique it and to have conversations about it, because it's been our life work for most of us. And you as a trans man has a bit of a different perspective than me as a gay man. And so it's like, where have our journeys taken us? And so I'm just grateful I get to pick your brain a little bit around this, because I do think you're uniquely qualified because of your whole life's journey of studying this, basically. And so you kind of alluded to a little bit of your childhood story of growing up, and I'd love to pull apart a little bit more. It sounds like you have a big journey, especially like your journey with masculinity has been lifelong. I want to hear about that. I want to hear about being on the U.S. karate team. That sounds so cool. Like, tell me what stories come to mind when you think about your journey with masculinity.
Well, I didn't meet my father till I was 25. My mom had me at 60. Her and my dad were young, and it was just one of those things, young kind of relationship where he wasn't around, and my grandparents helped raise me. Thankfully, they were there, and my papa was really a masculine role model to me, and he taught me so many great life lessons. And he taught me to love the earth. He taught me to fish. He taught me, he's a great storyteller. He taught me how to tell stories. He was very politically active, so he inspired that in me. He taught me very young, don't sit outside of something and complain about it. Get in there and offer some help to come up with solutions. That's how you don't sit outside and just complain. And I'm very grateful for those lessons. Like with a lot of role models, it's complicated because he had some parts to him. So much of him I'm grateful for and want to carry forward. And yet some traditional things that I don't want to carry forward because no one was having these conversations with him.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like he gave my grandmother an allowance to shop as a housewife. You know what I mean? That kind of very traditional thing, where, but nobody, like I say, was having these conversations. The value of her contribution to everyone as a self-made businessman. He didn't see that as the same as, equal to what he was contributing, And so, there's definitely things I don't want to carry forward. But I started martial arts 6 years old, and I often say that that's my soulmate. And because of coming from a dysfunctional family, my mom's on her 11th marriage now. The martial arts was my positive, chosen family, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Gave me that sense of chosen family really early. I was in the LGBTQ plus community, understand the value of chosen, community, chosen family.
Yeah.
And the dojo definitely taught really early. It was a place where I got positive reinforcement, and I was just a natural athlete that was also willing to do the work, because I loved it. I was the kid that got out of the dojo every night until they had to lock the doors.
They're kicking you out. Come on, it's time to go home now.
Yes. So I just ate it up. And then by the time I was 17, I won a lightweight fighting title. And then the world pretty much opened up to me in a lot of ways to compete, which took me out of the deep and gave me the opportunity to see that there were places and people that were LGBTQ plus and were out and open, and that the world at large wasn't as boxed in as things were in the South. And that really it gives you a much broader view of the world, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that really changed my trajectory and my path. But I always say one of the things I said actually teaching at a retreat this last week is I've been almost every letter of LGBTQ plus because I came out a little at a time, dipping my toe in trying.
Uh-huh. Many of us have a journey of dipping our toe in and taking one step in, and yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been a wild ride, and the intersectionalities of how your gender affects your sexuality is really interesting as well. But I was one of I was in a dojo, martial arts school, where there were only a small handful of people that were born female. It was mostly all guys. It was more like a kickboxing gym, so I really had I was very immersed into a very masculine space, and got to study a lot about that masculine jock-like behavior anyway, very early on, and the competitiveness in it. What was interesting in the martial arts is you saw the competitiveness, and yet you also saw a brotherhood.
Mm-hmm.
Because people who train together that for years, that really creates a unique bond.
For sure.
So I got to see a little of all of that, and I was really lucky enough to have my main instructor growing up. He was just an amazing man. He was a heavyweight fighting champion, but he was also the kind of guy that would cry in front of us over something tender, like us showering him with things for his birthday. That would just he would get really touched by that, and he wasn't afraid to show us that it would bring a few tears to his eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love that he was a real good role model as well.
Yeah, what a beautiful role model of being in a very traditionally masculine space. It's competitive and sports oriented, but also having access to your vulnerable emotions. Wow.
Yeah.
Mind blowing.
Especially in the South, right?
Yeah,
Especially
for sure.
Yeah.
Something that most boys don't get to experience is a role model that has access to all of that.
It's true. Yeah. And I mean, on the other hand, I saw some toxic, there were some, also in the martial arts, you see some egos that become this big, and some guys that use their position and their power to really belittle other people. There's both of those personalities. Some can handle that leadership and help others flourish with it, and some, use it to make themselves feel better and put others down, unfortunately. So I did see some of all of it, and like I said, I'm just a keen observer, so I was just taking all this in, studying,
making a note, putting this in my good to know folder. Got it.
Totally. And figuring out where there was some flexibility, and realizing, I realized really young, I didn't know how to explain it, but I realized really young that there were many different ways to be masculine or feminine. I saw that, right? I saw, there were women there that could fix a car, and women who were hardly left the house. You know what I mean? So, lots of different expressions. The same with masculinity. One of the most beautiful things I've seen, though, since I moved to Seattle was something I think I would have never seen growing up in the South, and that is men walking with just really embracing their nurturing side and having their babies just wrapped to their chest and walking down proudly, guys with beards, and they got their baby, all around there. It really struck me how beautiful that is, because, in the traditional model, we're told that being a nurturer is not the masculine role.
Yeah. We're the provider and the protector. We're not the nurturer, the caregiver. Yeah.
And I think, that doesn't, that messaging, a lot of us don't even get in touch with that nurturing side that is in there because of that. So I started really examining the messaging. Like when somebody says to you, act like a lady, if you're a little girl, what does that mean? or somebody tells a little boy, right next to a little girl who's crying, tells a little boy, you need to toughen up. You shouldn't cry for the same thing she's crying for.
Mm-hmm.
And I just started really going, this doesn't make sense. Right?
It's so amazing how early those messages start to get taught to us. I had the joyful opportunity to be able to have a blog that I wrote featured on your website, and I talk a little bit about our socialization and where that leads us as men to not being able to do some of those nurturing, caregiving, tending to the health of our relationships, because our socialization says don't do any of that. Don't be sensitive. Don't be emotional. Don't be weak. Don't be afraid. Play with this toy that allows you to compete and conquer others versus care for. And so it's amazing how early those messages get implanted into us. And so it becomes really difficult for so many of us to really suss out, like, what is my authentic expression and what is just what I was told I needed to be, because we start letting go of that really early on.
Yeah, one of the questions I ask people all the time is how much of your thinking is really your own thinking? And then I just let them sit with that. And I go back to your socialization, because we get socialized from our families, our schools, our teachers, our faith communities, and our peers, right? And the hard thing is that it's coming at us from all these directions. And sometimes the messages aren't even exactly spoken. Right? You just know that if you do this, you're going to get a lot of pushback, right? If you do certain things.
Especially for children, because so much is happening not on a conscious level for kids. They're just sponges absorbing information. They can tell, they can pick up on the difference when a parent says this is the rule, but the parent breaks the rule. They're much more paying attention to the parent's behavior than they are paying attention to the rule itself. And so, especially at that age, those like implicit messages are absorbed pretty quickly and get kind of locked in our nervous systems a bit.
Sure do. Yeah. Yeah. It's and then my mother's marriages. So my mother was married 5 times by the time she was 25. Like I said, she had me at 16. So there was this like kind of revolving door, and I studied all the behavior of those men coming in.
You got a revolving door of watching different kind of male behavior, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some were violent. I mean, we went through a time where, like one of my mother's husbands beat her, and, and I literally saw somebody like be able to, like the Jekyll and Hyde thing, where they could be 1 minute acting one way and the next minute it's like you flip a switch and they just go crazy, So I saw the, some of those aspects, and I was just like really studying all this, and the 1 or 2 or 3 emotions that a lot of masculine people are told it's okay to express are frustration and anger and assertiveness, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I'm powerful, right? But they don't, say, well, but think about how that's impacting the others around you and the way you're doing it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly the article I wrote for your website, was all about intention versus impact, and how we are trained not to pay attention to our impact as men. And like, how do we start to develop that now? Because it is a skill to practice.
It sure is. You have to, one of the things that I think is that we have to have, one of the things I do now, and I think I learned this from the dojo, is having that inner circle of people that you trust in your life. You trust their feedback, because that, it's, for some people, they just have one person like this in your life, and it's a blessing if you have even one. I'm lucky enough to have a few that I would call close enough friends that I trust their counsel, and I know that their intent is for my growth, right? They want me to do well. And so they have no ulterior motive to give me feedback, other than want me to thrive in life. And to have a few friends like that, a couple family members that you can really get that mirror from about your impact.
Yeah.
because a lot of times we don't realize our impact unless we have those people we trust to give us that mirror.
Hmm.
You know, so
Yeah, and I
important.
think that's even more complicated for those men that they're in relationships where like the trust isn't there, where it's sort of been there hasn't been the work to really trust is either being built or eroded at all times in relationships. And when it's been eroded to a certain point, like somebody can give you feedback and it can be really hard to trust it, or it can be really hard to not become immediately defensive because the trust and safety isn't there. It's one of the reasons I love doing the work that I do with horses is that you get that mirror, but from an animal. You take the human element out of it where someone could lie to you, someone could be deceiving you, where they're like the trust element. And we're now with just a little bit of a clearer feedback mechanism through this animal, this being that's life depends on being a very sensitive creature. And we
Yeah.
get to see what our impact is on the external environment when we get into a relationship like that. And so there's lots of different ways to do it, but I think that is so important how important it is to cultivate and develop those relationships where there's trust and safety, where we can get true, real, clear feedback and mirroring from others.
Gosh, yeah. One of the things I work with men on in positive masculinity is developing healthy masculine friendships, because a lot of men, I'm sure you and know this and have found this from your work, the depth of their male to male friendships is it's very shallow. A lot of men only talk
Absolutely.
about work and sports. I've had men that I've talked with that and mentored in the group that have had lifelong friends that they don't even know if when their friend goes through a major crisis like losing a parent or a spouse getting cancer, something major, they're uncomfortable how to comfort and be there for their friend because they don't have that kind of depth in their relationship. It's so shallow. It's a tap on the shoulder, right? Type
Hmm.
relationship, and they talk shoulder to shoulder, not looking at each other. That's also a male culture thing, which really impedes intimacy, right? When we look at one another, we're actually taking in all of the ways we communicate, right? Because we're seeing the more expression, the body language. But watch how men have a tendency to talk to one another. They don't look at each other most of the time.
Yeah, it's so much easier to have a conversation with another man sitting next to each other in the car where you're just shoulder to shoulder or where you're both working on something, both facing the thing that you're looking at,
Right.
than it is to actually just like stare eye to eye like you and I are doing with each other
Yeah,
right now, for
exactly.
sure.
Yeah. And I think, honestly, some of that I think comes from the messaging of the fear of homophobia, right? I might be gay
Correct.
if I look too intimate with my friend. I mean, we got to get over that.
We got
Forget
to get over that. That's an old story. That is so used up and got,
that.
like we're over it.
Right.
Moving on.
Yeah. And I honestly think this is one thing that we as masculine people can learn from the feminine.
Hmm.
They do intimate friendships much better.
Yeah,
Just do.
they do.
And I think we can admit that and learn from it, because they actually share what they're feeling and what's really going on in their heart, with each other, and give each other a lot of support
Hmm.
in that way.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's one of the things I work with, because I think that's imperative to our health. Actually, I mean, the statistics are really, they're pretty devastating when
They're
we look at
grim.
yeah, when we look at the amount of depression among middle-aged men and suicide, and why is that? Because there's a loneliness
Hmm.
in us because we're not opening and being willing to embrace vulnerability.
Yeah. I think a lot of men are feeling more and more isolated out in the world. And there may be like a female partner or a mom or some one female person in their life that they depend on that they can be a little bit more vulnerable with. But as you're saying, like our female or feminine identifying counterparts are often much better at having a diverse network of people that can meet different needs and show up for them and support them and be in those spaces of vulnerability. And I think it's a human thing that's necessary. We're all wired for connection. We're not just women are wired for connection. We all are. And so we need that. And I think we are seeing the consequences of sort of our internalized homophobia, the ways that we haze each other as men by feminizing each other. Don't be a sissy, don't be a girl. Like this rejection of the feminine that doesn't allow us to really connect.
Yeah, this is the issue with any binary system. A binary system is, it's one against the other. The one needs the other to define itself. Because what am I? I'm opposite of that. And, that's the hard thing with a binary system. It literally pits one against the other. And it's not healthy. First of all, it's false. Gender is not binary. It's a spectrum like sexuality is. It's a big spectrum.
Yeah. Can you tell me this is something that always comes up in my mind for you and I both agree that gender's not on a binary. For you who has been on your own gender journey, and you said you sort of represented every letter of the LGBT at one point, why has it been important for you to identify as male and to like claim that identity when you recognize that it's not really a binary in the way that like it almost like would trigger to an outside person who's never explored gender? Oh, okay, well you're fitting right back into the gender binary. So like what is that like, where does that come up for you?
Well, it's been a journey, as I'll say. It's been a journey. My original, like, of course, my foundational learning was that it is a binary myself. And then I had to do a lot of opening and exploring to realize that it's not. I always knew I was masculine literally 4 years old, I'm changing my name to a masculine name. I didn't know how to explain it, what I was feeling. I just knew I didn't fit into what they told me I'm supposed to as a feminine person. I didn't fit into the feminine model they were telling me I should. What I've come to realize, it's so interesting, is now I more identify as transmasculine, and masculinity has a huge spectrum to it in itself. Mm-hmm. One of the things I say when I teach is, there's The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, we know The Rock, and then that's one form of masculinity, and there's Fred Rogers, a very different form of masculinity, and yet they're both masculine. That's why I think it's masculinities. There's many different expressions, right?
Yeah. I love, I've done some collaborations with men that are part of the American Psychological Association's Division 51, which is the studies of men and masculinities. They've purposefully made sure to engage in the masculinities because it is about not creating a rigid structure that everybody has to follow, that it's really about the opening of that to be self-defined and to still be valid as a self-defined version of masculinity.
Yeah. I love that you brought up that word, rigid. One of the things I have realized within myself, even though I grew up with very rigid structures in the Bible Belt in the South, right? Then you look at rigidity. And then I thought about it as an athlete. Rigidity is something that no athlete wants because that's going to cause you to get injured. Rigidity in our body as athletes, or as people even taking a walk, if you fall and you're rigid, you're going to get injured more, right? It really increases your chance of injury. Then I relate that to us emotionally. Well, then I read a book Dr. Susan David wrote, Emotional Agility. And she talks about the importance of being agile emotionally. And we've all heard about, I think most of us have heard about this idea of a fixed mindset. People with a fixed mindset have a harder
black and white thinking.
That's right. Yeah, they have a harder time in relationships and in life, right? Because they're very rigid. That's a rigid way of thinking. This is a quote from my book. Rigidity is nothing to celebrate. The ability to stay soft and agile with all the adversity we face to walk in our authenticity is rare. I just think, the world is changing all the time all around us.
Yeah.
And that ability to stay agile. Another thing I relate to besides just the athletic part of agility is I grew up in Florida. Don't hold that against me.
I'll try not to. I'll do my best.
But, when those hurricanes come, which I grew up and lived through many, many hurricanes, right? The trees that are more rigid are the ones that get damaged. It's the palm trees that are flexible that come out of the storm fine. It's another like life's lesson analogy to us, that rigidity in our thinking and in our belief systems, it limits ourselves, but it also limits the relationships we have with others, because then we're judging them on that rigid, narrow view, right? Instead of allowing them the flexibility to walk their own journey.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that on a hugely on a cultural level, like in our politics and our divisiveness. It is really rigid and brittle and ready to snap at any moment in so many different arenas of our life, at least in the US. I think it's happening in lots of different places. But I think that those of us that learn to bend, that learn to be flexible, that learn to create like durability through our flexibility, that's what will help us move through this time frame and help us to kind of come to a place where we can see each other's humanity again, because we're missing that and losing that so often these days.
We so are, the ability to just have difficult conversations, uncomfortable conversations, I call them. I've had many of them as a trans person because, of course, I think it was about 7 years ago, the Huffington Post wrote an article that said more people in the United States of America claim to have seen a ghost than have knowingly met a transgender person in person. and that statistic was about 12% of the people claimed to have seen a ghost. So one of the things as a teacher and a speaker I always do is I always say to everyone, please come up and shake my hand afterwards so you have officially met a transgender person. I'm trying to up that statistic. Because it's easy for people to judge a group of people over there that they've never had a conversation with, that they've never looked eye to eye with, right? It's easy to have these ideals about a certain type of person that you've never really engaged with. But once we come together and have a conversation, maybe break bread together, whatever, it changes that dynamic, because now I'm a human. I'm not just whatever, color my skin is, or whatever my sexual orientation is, or whatever my gender identity is, right?
Yeah.
We find those commonalities in our humanness, and that just changes the game.
Yeah, and to bring that really into our work as men, and the work that you and I are so fascinated about is that I think that's even more important for men, because our socialization as little boys teaches us to compete, teaches us to see others as objects in the way of our sort of objectives, hurdles to get through, romantic partners to conquer. Like we start to otherize people instead of seeing their humanity. And we're seeing the consequences of that in our world. That's the sort of the conversations that have come out of the Me Too movement, that are coming out of Black Lives Matter, that coming out of Time's Up. Like, we're really looking at all of those different places in our culture where we've not been able to connect with the humanity. We've just connected with the otherized person. And what we do with our power or our privilege or our the power, I think is a good word for it. What we do with our power when someone is other rather than the human across from me.
Right. Oh God. Yeah. So important for us to open our view and just remember, first of all, that we're all trying to figure this out. None of us have all the answers. Number one, I always tell people, if somebody tells you they have all the answers, run like hell, because they're full of it.
Yeah. I've had some hard learnings about thinking someone had all the answers and then going, oh no, gotta run away, because it's
right. We're all. I mean, one of the things I always tell people about that is so interesting is if we all just think back in tens, like think back of yourself 10 years ago, and you thought you had a lot figured out, that now 10 years later you look back at and you go, boy, I know a lot more now than I did then. Right? I have a much deeper understanding than I did then. One of the things I get people to do with trying to understand transition is I get people that are over 30. I say, look back at your high school yearbook and look at yourself. Are you still that same person? And of course, most people laugh because they look at that and how goofy it looks to you now.
Yeah.
Like, all dressed up for prom or homecoming or whatever, and you go, what was I thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've transitioned from that person,
Mm-hmm.
that is not who you are today, right?
It's so funny because I often say that with my clients, regardless of how they identify on the sexuality spectrum, I say to them, like, gay people are not the only ones that have a coming out process. Each one of us has to come out around our belief systems, around our spirituality, our lack of spirituality, our boundaries. Like, our whole lives are a series of coming outs.
Right.
And now what I'm hearing from you is that everyone transitions also. It's
Everyone
not just for trans folk.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how I try to get people to relate,
Mm-hmm.
because, and of course, the older you get, the more silly it is when you look back at that high school picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
further away you feel from that person, right?
Yeah, totally. I'd love to pull you out a little bit more. You alluded to in the beginning, talking about being on the US karate team and not transitioning until later in life so that you could compete. It's a pretty topical conversation in our culture right now, like trans athletes. And so I'd love to hear some of your own story with that, and then kind of how that relates to what we're talking about around your own masculinity, around what you've learned about. Yeah, just share with me that story.
Well, the science hadn't caught up when I was still on the team, right? They've learned a lot more about it, and there just hasn't been, honestly, a lot of funding to study. Unfortunately, the trans community is small, so there's not a lot of funding for these kinds of studies to understand it. But I was in a contact sport. All my awards are in fighting. And so it's even more complicated when you're talking a contact sport than if you're just running track or something like that, where you're not touching each other, right? It's very different. And it was really hard, but I also knew that I had such a unique opportunity. It was hard not to be my full authentic self, but only the top 100 athletes in every sport get an opportunity like that. So I knew that was such a rare opportunity that I had worked really hard for, that I competed literally from the time I was 17 at that high level till I was 39. I also have good genetics as an athlete and held up that long. And at 39, I was the oldest one, male or female, on the U.S. karate team. And these 19-year-old, 20-year-olds were calling me the grandparent of the team.
39. Oh my
God. I know, right?
That is good genetics, though, for a contact sport. 39. That's
yeah. And so I won 2 medals in the world championships at 39, and looked at my clock and said, this is probably a really good
going out on top
experience to go out on. Yeah. And so I retired, and I helped, but I'm still a certified Olympic coach and referee. And, they will allow you to do that, of course. And then I just am trying to help create a better path for athletes going forward. There's a lot of work to be done in that. Like I said, we need a lot more study around that, but the actual science of it, there is more understanding of the fact that once you're on hormone replacement therapy for 2 years, you're no longer producing the hormones that you were born with. So I know there's a lot of push around, like, especially female trans athletes, that they have all this testosterone, right? But if they've been on hormone replacement therapy, HRT, we call it, for 2 years, they aren't having that anymore. It's really reversed all of that. So they don't have that advantage anymore. Now, they had that in their original muscle development, but the minute they start the other hormones, they lose muscle tone right away. The minute they start the female hormones. So, I mean, there's a lot of science around it. But what we have to really do is open people's mind to even listen to that.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people are stuck in the sex assigned at birth. They're just so stuck in that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me how often trans women are at sort of like the bottom of the rung. Like, it's in terms of the lack of power and privilege. Like, trans women get have a really, really
Oh,
challenging road ahead of them.
yeah. I mean, when I hear these people say, "Oh, it's a fad now to be trans," I look at them like, really? How
Mm,
can you? I mean, because I will tell you, to wake up almost every day and hear of some place in the world trying to make another law against you doing something basic as a trans person, competing in the high school sports or going to the bathroom, it's daunting.
mhm,
It's daunting. And who would sign up for that kind of abuse and limitation, and people not just seeing your humanness,
mhm.
unless there was a real reason behind it.
Yeah, who would choose that path?
Right.
To be constantly be dehumanized by your culture, by to otherize you, even in terms of just like the basic necessity to use the bathroom. Like, who
Yeah.
would choose that path as a fad? Oh, this feels fun. No,
Yeah.
that's not fun.
No, that's people that have no understanding at all of
Yeah,
this
yeah.
affair.
You had mentioned that you're Olympic coach and referee. Do you find yourself to be one of a few trans folk that are at that level?
There are a few other trans folks that are in there, and now we also have more trans athletes actually
Mm-hmm.
at an Olympic level. We're making strides,
Mm-hmm.
slow, and especially when you think about the Olympics, because you're involving the Olympic governing committee it involves people from all these different countries with different levels of understanding, right? And different cultural thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a little bit longer. It's not just like it's just the United States. When you're in Olympics, you're in relationship with people from all these countries that help run this, right? So
Yeah, and potentially competing in places where you're not actually physically safe or the laws are against you.
totally,
Yeah,
yeah, it'd
that's
be pretty
wild.
scary, actually. Yeah.
It's wild to think about the journey. I mean, I have my own relationship to it being a gay man, but I think there's a whole nother level of it when gender is also a part of it. That so many of us understand the concept of striving in our life and making strides towards betterment and towards bigger things. But for a lot of people, that's focused on their careers, their romantic relationship, their children, all of those kinds of things. But when you also then have to put all that effort into just identity work and to just striving to be seen as valid and human, like how much emotional toll that puts on an individual. It's just like kind of I'm connecting with that on an empathetic emotional level, on a deeper level right now. That it's not about just making strides as a person out there and like meeting your goals. It's about striving for validity and for to be seen as valid.
Oh, it's so much so. It it's emotional labor, right? It's like this constant work, and then the gall of a person like me, right? Of the trans guy that's going to write a book and educate about masculinity. I know that. What the hell does he think he's doing? The gall of this guy. But I've been a teacher for so long because of the martial arts, right? I started, when I started at 6, one of the things the martial arts does is when you learn something, you turn around, they teach you really early to turn around and help the person at the belt rank under you and bring them up, right? Which helps solidify what you've learned in you in
Mm-hmm.
a different way. You really think through what you've learned to be able to share it. And then, I just have a teacher's heart as well. I just want to help people thrive and do
Yeah,
better.
I
So I
feel
really
that from you so clearly.
thank you. Yeah. And I feel like the people in my dojo like lifted me up and were there for me, and I gained so much from them that I wanted to pass that on as a
Mm,
teacher. And so I've done that, and I just think that sharing my experience. I just had this experience of teaching at this retreat last week, and they had me teach an entire class on socialization and gender. And then run a men's circle. And I had so many men walk up to me afterwards and say, and these are cis men, they're some bisexual, mostly, I would say, heteronormative. that they said, wow, I'd never thought about it like that. I'd never really thought through my own socialization. Thank you for opening my eyes to this, and that makes it all worth it.
Mm-hmm.
It makes the journey and the struggle and the emotional labor all worth it, because it's just helping people also see how the traditional masculine model and the patriarchy has also limited all of us, and getting more men to see that it's not healthy for us either.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like some of us have been starting to wake up to the impacts on others outside of masculine, like on women, people of color, queer people. We've been awake to that. But then when we actually start to personalize it and recognize where it's been limiting us, like me, masculinity limits me constantly. So that rigidity of masculinity does. And I love that you had the gall to become that teacher, because like those men are showing you that you're meant to teach that, because it's been your life's work and your life's journey. It's why I was saying in the beginning how much I'm so grateful to have met you and you leading men's work from a queer perspective, because that's been my journey too. When I started this podcast, I was really worried and knew I'd get some critical feedback around like, what's this fag got to do telling me about how to be a man? Yeah. And I got a little bit of that in the beginning, but when I knew that my own healing needed me to step into that and to like take a seat at the table, that was such a transformative moment for me. And to see another man doing that and to be having the gall to be like, I'm going to just do this, even though I wasn't given permission or invited, I'm going to do it anyways. That is using our privilege and power as men for good, for the constructive force rather than the destructive force.
Yes, exactly. And we need to allow it's so important that we hear from different voices at the table, right? It's so important because it broadens our world, it broadens our view. And hopefully it gives us empathy and compassion, and just allows us to see a bigger picture, like of the impact of things, but then like we were saying before, I think getting men to bring it back to how has it impacted me personally changes the game in their willingness to jump in and do this work of unraveling and peeling back the layers of their own socialization. And that's how we're going to really create big change.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to personalize it. You got to like most people don't change until they feel the hurt, until they feel the discomfort of it. And when you start to recognize your own discomfort in it, that's when you have the motivation to make a change, usually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've often said to people, what if you had no limitations as a kid and nobody ever told you that you couldn't play with a certain thing or you couldn't try a certain activity? Because, I've heard so many people say, maybe I wanted to dance more, but that was for girls. I shouldn't do that. Maybe I wanted to learn to cook more, but that was not something I was told I was supposed to do, and I've had girls say the same thing. I wasn't supposed to do this other thing because that was a boy's thing. What if we had none of those limitations? Who would you be today?
Mm-hmm.
And what would you have tried and experienced that you haven't because that limited you? And most of it's up here, right? And societal pressure. But then we take that messaging and turn around and limit ourselves even as adults.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we internalize those voices of control and limitation, and then we have no other choice but then to limit ourselves based on what we were told. Yeah.
Yeah.
So through all of your work, through all of your athlete time and your time in the dojo, I know you affectionately nickname yourself the gender sensei. So you're out.
Someone else gave that name. I will say I didn't nickname myself. A fellow teacher friend, Reed Malco. I was teaching at something called Sex Geek Summer Camp, which he runs for sex educators. It's for sex educators to help them build their sex and gender educators to help them build their business. And he is a fellow martial artist. And when I got gender there, he goes, I think you are now the gender sensei. And I was like, whoa, buddy, that is like, yeah, that's awesome.
I love it. Yeah, so you're doing workshops around gender and LGBTQIA issues in different organizations. You are an Olympic athlete, you're an Olympic coach, you're an Olympic referee, you do sex education stuff. You've got your hands in a lot of things. Let's talk about why you specifically wanted to also do a portion of your work around masculinity and the positive masculinity groups that you've created. Tell me about it.
Yeah. So when the Me Too movement, was at its peak, I was watching all these conversations, that women were having about how the patriarchy and traditional and toxic masculinity has affected their lives. And what I saw was I didn't see men involved in the conversation, except a few men that were, resisting, right? That's the only part I saw a few men involved in the conversation. And I thought, why aren't men talking about the fact that this has also affected us and being a part of creating a healthier way forward for all of us? This is something we can't expect women to do for us alone. We need to help restructure this so it's healthier for all of us. And so that's what gave me the idea. And I literally had a download from the universe. I call it, I get a vision basically. And I saw all these different forms of masculinity, all these different types of men sitting in a circle, sitting together at the table, men of various ages, ethnic backgrounds, education levels, different life experiences, talking about this, first working on healing first admitting that it's affected us negatively, then working on healing from that and holding space for one another to share how we've been hurt by it, which is huge. And then together working on how can we create something better for all of us to move forward. So that's the vision I had. So I called a friend of mine who was a Kinsey Scale 6 gay guy, good buddy. And I knew he had a lot of experience with toxic masculinity. He had, in fact, a toxic father. And he was, his mannerisms were very gay young. And so his father started belittling him right away. He became like a state track champion, and his father would never go support him or be proud of him when he would win a track meet because he told him it wasn't a man enough sport. He wanted him to hit people and play football.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was just crazy. Yeah.
Wow.
He constantly belittled him. So I knew, because we were good friends, we had talked about this, because we had talked about, sexuality and gender. We were activists together, good friends that are activists. And so when I got this idea, he was the person I thought of right away that he would understand this and want to do this work. So I called him and told him about my download, my vision, and said, would you be willing to walk this journey with me? And he was like, hell yes, I'm in. Let's do this. There's so much of a need for this. So we started the nonprofit, started the men's group together. And we actually even started the book together. And then about a year and a half ago, he passed away of cancer at only 47. And, I wish he was here to see the book come to fruition with me. And I hope he's seeing it and proud up there that the work is carrying on. I miss him dearly. But yeah, we both knew the importance of this from different experiences, which was actually really great, and here we had like a gay guy and a trans guy leading all these different guys just straight through this. And, him and I would every now and then chuckle about that, like, what are the chances of that? But, we just so believe in the work that we're doing. And one of the things that we found is when we open up these conversations, wow, there's men really want to open up and have a safe space to talk about these things. But it's not easy to find.
Yeah.
Especially in a masculine group, it's not easy to find that will hold the space and not be judgmental and belittle you for having feelings about this and talking about the way you've been harmed from, these old models.
Yeah, I did not did not anticipate a very like tender, sweet story within all of that. On top of just the creation of the group, thank you for letting us have a little taste of what that friendship meant to you. Like to know that there are men that are having that sweetness in their connection and the grief of loss, and also what you guys created together continues to last, and it's just really powerful to be witness to that story. So thank you for sharing it and letting us all into the meaning of that relationship for you. Yeah, I agree. It is hard to find those groups. I mean, I've lived in Seattle. I'm coming up on my 6th year now, and I didn't know that your group existed until recently. And I'm doing men's work, and I'm doing like I'm a coach that's working with men around these things, and I didn't know you existed in the group. And so it can be really challenging to find groups like that. I have sort of dabbled in other heart centered groups of men's work in the Seattle area and just not found them to be what I was looking for. And so I love this element of the trans man and the gay man up there facilitating there. What has your experience been holding space for all different types of men? Have you received any pushback or any challenges based on the fact that you're a trans man?
Well, the Proud Boys tried to infiltrate a few of our meetings.
Oh my gosh, what a
Yeah,
drama story. Oh,
totally. And I was like, I mean, at first I was, of course, frustrated. We were having Zoom meetings, and they were infiltrating our meetings, and I mean, they were literally doing middle school stuff like drawing penises on the screen, and it was just ridiculous. I felt like I was managing a middle school
you
class.
are kidding me. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and of course, once we realized what they were doing, we booted them out. We got them out of there. But and then I said, Drew and I talked about it, and I said, actually, it's kind of we should be proud that they're worried about us.
That they're paying attention. Proud that the Proud Boys are paying attention.
That's right, because they don't want us to mess with their traditional model. They want that. They're holding on to it with all their teeth. You know, because that kind of man is threatened by any new thinking around equity and equality and us
Yeah.
embracing new ways to be.
Right, because there's only a finite amount of power, and I'm not willing to give up any of mine so that anybody else can feel empowered.
Yes, because it's pie.
Power is pie.
You, there will not be any pie left for me, right?
Yeah. Those darn scarcity models that get embedded in us so easily.
Yeah. And that's another thing, in the masculine community that we have to combat. And it's funny for me to talk about this. I think some people find it funny as somebody who's been a competitor my whole life. And I love sport competition. I love it. But I've always been able to lay that aside when I get out of the ring or out of the, off the competition floor. Some people, they have a harder time with that, right? But in masculine world, we're competitive to the point that we will step on, like you mentioned earlier, we'll do whatever we need to do to be successful, to win the prize, to be the most productive, to, get the title, whatever it is. That's the messaging that we're given, right? To be the top dog, right? It's like King of the Hill game when we were kids. And that's actually celebrated in the masculine community.
Totally.
Yeah. Instead of encouraging collaboration, which makes us all so much stronger, and we learn from one another, and we all grow, and that's one of the messages I'm trying to help people realize, that how limiting that is to all of us, and how that actually, I think, is another hindrance to close masculine friendships, intimate masculine friendships, is that drive to be competitive instead of collaborative.
Yeah, absolutely. If you see your fellow man as the competitor and that you're fighting for scarce resources or power, of course you're not going to have close intimate. That's like the killer of intimacy for sure.
Right. Yeah. Like the warrior, I'm not going to put my weapons down to sit with you. I'm going to, keep your guard up. Right.
Totally.
Yeah.
And tell me how this men's work group led to the book. I know you kind of talked about that you and your friends started writing it together, and now it's in your hands, and you're the author that's sort of put this out there. Tell me a little bit about the book.
Well, when Drew and I started, we started by telling our stories with traditional and toxic masculinity and why we came to this work, and we had created many lesson plans basically, or outlines for our discussion group, because we would cover a different topic every month. That's the way we run our monthly discussion group, is we pick a different topic and we cover that, as you saw when you joined us last month, which was the topic was about masculinity and intimacy, and what are the obstacles to us having healthy intimacy, which is such an unusual conversation for men to have together.
Totally. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So we pick sometimes edgy topics, and we talk about the man masks, but Drew and I had created all of these lesson plans together, basically outlines for work, with our discussion group. And then we looked at it and said, we already basically have a book here. We just need to fill out more, from our outlines, because of course we'd use that and we'd have all this stuff we talk about teaching. And we did a lot of research on each of those subjects, like healthy masculine friendships was one of the workshops. The man masks that we wear, the always self-sufficient, we go on, no pain, no gain mask, we can go on and on about that. We did all this research and had all this information already for our group. So it wasn't a hard jump for us to say we can write a book about this and reach more people with this message. Yeah, so that's how that project started. And we did a few recordings early because Drew had a harder time writing. And so we would do recordings, and then I had it transcribed for some of the work we did on the book. And then I got a book coach after Drew passed away, and just because I needed help formatting. I'd written a lot of articles. I've written for the Huffington Post and different things, but formatting for a book I had never done. So, and that's a whole new world. So, I got a book coach, a professional book coach and editor, who helped me when I got stuck and would tell me, you need to, fill in a little more here, a little less over here, that kind of thing, and help me put it all together. And yeah, there it is. It's like, it's like birthing something. I will tell you, it's an exciting thing. It's scary. You put your whole heart and soul into it, and then you put it out into the world for people to sit back and do what they want with it, and it's like, I've heard a lot of authors say it's like birthing, and then the child leaves and they go out into the world and you're like, oh my God.
Yeah. I'm always impressed by people who sit down and do that kind of creation, the book creation thing. The publishing world is hard. The editing process is hard. The letting go of the book once it's out there is hard. Like, yeah, there are joyful, exciting parts of it, but there is a lot of emotional labor and a lot of just actual writing labor and mental labor that goes into a book.
Sure is. I mean, I think the statistic is like there's 86% they say of people in the world say they want to write a book. 1% follow through with it.
Wow.
It's because it's daunting. It is a hard. I'm already working on 2 other books now. It's really difficult though.
Yeah.
But now I got the bug. You got the bug because this, I feel very blessed, especially as a trans person writing about this subject. The book has been #1 new release in 5 categories.
Oh my gosh.
And men's health is one of them, gender studies. It's really done sociology. It's really done so well so far. Most authors sell 250 books a year. This book we're at about 475 already, and it's only been out 3 months.
Oh, nice. Congratulations.
It's just really blowing my mind a bit, and I got an email the other day. This is the crazy kind of things that happen from doing something like this. I got an email the other day from a guy from Yugoslavia, Yugoslavia, saying he read my book and he wanted to Zoom with me. And I set up a time. This was a couple of weeks ago. Set up a time to have a conversation with this guy, and he was so moved by the book that he wanted to know if I'm going to train facilitators to start positive masculinity groups at other places because he wants to start one there.
Oh my gosh, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
So, I mean, that kind of thing can happen from this. That's,
Yeah.
The idea of putting that out into the world. In the way the publishing world is now, there's a lot of crazy things about it.
Totally.
I mean, but it has such a far reach too, Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Oh, I'm so excited for your success with this and sort of thinking about the rippling impact that has on the world. That's so powerful to even know it reached Yugoslavia and somebody's excited and inspired to take your learning, your writings and teach others and to implement it out there in different areas of the world. That's fantastic.
Yeah. And I've even had single moms that are raising boys by the book because they want to know how to raise healthy boys.
Oh gosh, that's so needed. That makes me so happy.
I've had female therapists that treat male patients buy the book and talk to me about they bought it because they want to learn how to help their masculine patients with the things they deal with around masculinity. It's really great.
Oh, I'm so thrilled for you and for the work that you and I are both so passionate about. You said you have the bug. You said you're writing new books. Are you up for teasing what people can expect to find from you in the future?
Sure. Well, my wife is also doing gender work. She is in her PhD program right now for psychology, and she's specializing in women's sexual agency. So she's doing a whole gender dive into the women's end, and I'm doing this dive into I've done the dive into the whole thing, but now specializing more in the masculine end. So one of the workshops we co-teach is how to be a masculine feminist. And we're co-writing a book on that. We believe that there are a lot of men out there that want to be allies to women, that have a lot of women in their life they care about and they want to lift them up. But some people don't know where to begin or how to do it. And what we do in the workshop and what we're going to do in the book is lay out a roadmap for that.
Oh, that's so needed because I do meet so many men that are afraid of doing it wrong and afraid of even stepping into action because they're going to do it wrong. Cancel culture is a real thing going on right now. And so it is like some of us do need a roadmap to give us permission and a way forward how to step into that. So, I'm so glad you guys are doing that.
Yeah. And I'm also writing one on specifically, I have a chapter in this book on healthy masculine friendships. I'm doing an entire book on it because there's so much around that.
Oh, gosh, you're like picking so many of my favorite like sweet spots. Oh, I love this. I can't wait to read these books in the future. I
might interview you for that book.
Oh, love to.
I do want other perspectives. Of course, that's really important in that.
Yeah, no. I'm so excited for the future for that. Please do reach out. Well, I have had such a pleasure. It's been such a pleasure talking with you. As I said in the beginning, and I just want to keep reinforcing, I just feel very inspired to be connected with you, to be in community with another queer person that's doing this kind of work. It's reinvigorating and makes me feel like, okay, I'm not alone doing this. It's not so isolating. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Yeah. If people want to find out more about you and your work out there in the world, how do they do so? Where are your websites, social media, any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, positivemasculinitynow.org is the website. And that's also the Instagram and the TikTok and we're doing all kinds of fun stuff out there. We have a positive masculinity page on Facebook as well. But if you go to the website, you'll get the links to all of that and a YouTube channel. One thing I wanted to mention real quick that I think we've talked about the queer community, but that toxic and traditional masculinity and the patriarchy is also alive and well in the queer community.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, some people would think it's not, but we've all had that same social conditioning. So it needs to be unpeeled there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's happening in the queer community. We're still using the same outdated tools and engagement styles that we were raised with. And so we have broken out of that with our queer identities. And I want to encourage people to continue breaking out of those traditional ways and those rigid mindsets and fixed mindsets on, especially on masculinity and power. And like, let's stop the cycle of like re-wounding each other because
Yeah.
we've been wounded. Like, let's do our work and let's not continue to re-wound each other. I'm so on board with that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's
Well,
so important.
I hope people will go to your website, check out the blog. There is a recent post that came out in August or that I wrote around intention versus impact with masculinity. So I'd encourage people to go check that out. If people want to get in connection with me, you can go to my website at travisstock.com. You can also reach me at Travers03 on Instagram. That's where some of the ongoing conversations are about the podcast and about how to continue engaging in the new masculine, not just by listening to the episodes. I'm also on Patreon. You can follow me on patreon.com/the new masculine if you want to become a contributor and support the mission of the podcast. I see you're raising your book. We forgot to promote the book. Let's make sure that we promote the book, Positive Masculinity Now by Mac McGregor. And it's on Amazon. They can find it there.
Print, and then in the late fall, I'm going into the studio to do the audio version. So,
Good. I'm glad because so many of us are now like listening to our books rather than reading like while we're doing our other things. So I'm glad you're getting an audio out there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mac, for joining me, for being a part of the new masculine, for inviting me to be a part of positive masculinity. It's just been such a pleasure to have this conversation.
Yes. Thank you.